First round of the French presidential polls, all candidates are ramping up measures to get to the country's top spot. Incumbent President Emmanuel Macron continues to remain the favourite, with far-right candidate Le Pen inching closer to securing the second position. This would lead to a Macron-Le Pen second-round runoff on April the 24th. Le Pen has steadied her ship in the final leg of the presidential campaign by broadening the lead over her far-right rival, Zemmour. Le Pen's primary focus is the elusive vote populaire, that is the working-class electorate. It was once solidly left-wing, but has since drifted to the far right over the years. Le Pen's far-right candidate, Eric Zemmour, has been vocal about his anti-Islamic position and harsh rhetoric towards migrants. Experts suggest that Zemmour's incendiary attacks on immigrants and Muslims have helped Le Pen gain those extra points. According to recent polls, Le Pen is the second most liked politician in the country currently, with 35% of the people saying that they have a good image of the leader. Le Pen, who has toned down her rhetoric to come across as more respectable during this campaign, is currently the key contender to President Emmanuel Macron. Recent polls have indicated Macron could win the election with nearly 53% of the vote, while Le Pen is likely to end up with 47% of the vote. Well, our correspondent Ross Cullen is joining us live from Paris. Well, Ross, let's start with a rundown of how things are currently looking in this French election.
Well, Nick, yes, we are now just 9 days away from the first round. As you mentioned there, the French election is split into two rounds for this presidential vote. The first one is on the 10th of April. All 12 candidates will be able to stand. And then the top two candidates, if no one candidate does get a majority, the top two then go on to a runoff 2 weeks later to face off against each other in a straight battle for the presidency. And then on the 24th of April, that is when we are confirmed to who will be the next or the continuing President of France. Emmanuel Macron is eligible to run again. You can serve 2 5-year terms as President of France. He is coming to the end of his first term after storming to the presidency in 2017 as the surprise centrist option. He is running his campaign as much as he can do. Of course, he is also dealing with the war in Ukraine, but in terms of the domestic campaign, you're right that it seems that current polls do suggest that Marine Le Pen is his most likely opponent in the second round. The extreme right leader has led the National Rally, is the current iteration of her party. Previously the National Front. She was the candidate who stood against Emmanuel Macron in that runoff 5 years ago. She could well be ending up in a rematch against him. Some of the other candidates include Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who is the far left leader of the France Unbowed party, and also on the right, you mentioned Marine Le Pen has a rival of her own on her wing of the political spectrum, Eric Zemmour, who is another far-right leader who has formed his own party to try to be able to take the presidency. There are also the more regular centre-right and centre-left parties that were pretty much taken aback seriously by Emmanuel Macron's win in 2017, but they are running far behind Valérie Pécresse and Anne Hidalgo for the Republicans and the Socialists. But the campaign is going on, and we are now heading in towards the period where parties will start to plan their final election rallies and big events. Emmanuel Macron has one coming up this weekend here in Paris. We are going to see more. Marine Le Pen and Jean-Luc Mélenchon have some next week as well, as they try to show that they are the right person to lead France for the next 5 years. A crucial election, and now coming after the German election we had last year, the end of Angela Merkel's era as Chancellor of Germany. France is the only nuclear armed power inside the European Union. It's a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council and as a major player on the world stage, as we've seen with the war in Ukraine. So it is a crucial election, not just for Europe, but for the wider world as well.
And Ross, you mentioned the war in Ukraine. Of course, what's happening in France is taking place with that backdrop of war in Eastern Europe. What kind of an impact is that war in Ukraine having on this election in France?
Well, Emmanuel Macron left it very late, Nick, to declare his candidacy, that he was going to stand for re-election. He was regularly holding calls with Joe Biden, Olaf Scholz, Boris Johnson to try to organise a coordinated Western response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That continues to dominate. He spoke to Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, in the last hour. We just had a tweet readout from the Ukrainian leader saying that continued talks with Emmanuel Macron about countering Russian aggression, discussing the negotiation process, and also the initiative of France for humanitarian corridors from Mariupol that Volodymyr Zelensky says must be implemented. That was an idea that France, along with Turkey and Greece, discussed about trying to organise evacuation processes from Mariupol, the besieged southern port city in Ukraine. So he was speaking to Volodymyr Zelensky just in the last couple of hours, the Ukrainian president, after late morning French time, having hosted 4 Ukrainian MPs and also a Ukrainian mayor who was captured by the Russian army on the 11th of March, held for 5 days in captivity before being involved in a prisoner swap. He was then released, and he has actually been speaking to Emmanuel Macron today to try to bring the point of view of Ukraine and Ukrainian MPs straight to the heart of the French government, straight into the French presidential office and residence, to speak to Emmanuel Macron directly in person. We are seeing also a visit to Kiev, the Ukrainian capital, today in person by the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, and we are now seeing in-person visits from Ukrainian officials here in Paris as well. So Emmanuel Macron is clearly involved regularly with the overall coordinated Western effort to try to continue to put pressure on Russia, to isolate Moscow, to force it to abandon its military invasion of Ukraine. Emmanuel Macron is trying to do as much as he can, he says, his team, when it comes to the diplomacy, but also not forgetting about the domestic election campaign. He is trying to show that he does have plans. He has unveiled his manifesto, but he is also trying to fight off scandal in the form of what's been known as McKinsey Gate, with the government spending more than $2 billion on services from the United States consultancy firm. It did admit to spending more than $900 million in 2021. It says it needed to do that to outsource some of the work to deal with the coronavirus pandemic here in France, but the reach of McKinsey inside the French government has gone beyond that, working also on pensions reform, on the digital transition, and the quite defensive reaction from the government about their use of McKinsey has caused a real problem for Emmanuel Macron in recent days. So the campaign is continuing, and Emmanuel Macron is trying to balance being able to work with Western allies, also speaking to Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking to Vladimir Putin also regularly as well, with trying to balance his domestic campaign. But he does have a fight on his hands from his closest rivals, which do appear to be coming from the far right.
Thank you very much, Ross. So that was Ross Cullen joining us live from Paris.